Jess, welcome to the Lockdown Barbecue Show. How are your family coping in lockdown in Austin, Texas?
We're doing pretty great here, to be honest with you, as best as anyone can hope to be during this time. Honestly, I've really enjoyed it forcing me to be more at home than traveling and on the road, which has just meant more time in the backyard cooking and recipe testing. So,
Jess, you were obviously born in Australia and you're now a Texan by choice. Tell us about your journey. How did that come about and what was your journey from Australia to Texas?
I mean, the only difference being that I'm now in Texas, I'd be willing to bet that our stories are pretty much all the same, which is that you ate barbecue for the first time and you fell in love with it. So that was my story, and it was just something I did when I was traveling through Texas, and that's what you do when you come to Texas. Like, even before this big renaissance of barbecue that we're experiencing now, Lockhart is officially the capital of Texas barbecue, and you would come here and you would, go two-stepping and ride a horse and eat barbecue. And so it was that first trip to Texas that I had that first taste and got hooked. And then I kept coming back and forth over the years. And it got to the point where it's like, all right, Pryles, you're pretty much going to have to move. This is ridiculous. Like, it's time to call it a day and move and be closer to it. That's how I ended up here.
Jess, you're the co-founder of the Australasian BBQ Alliance. What was the aim of the alliance?
I love that only a Brit or person from the Commonwealth can actually say Australasian properly. The idea was I co-founded the Australasian BBQ Alliance with two other guys, Jay Beaumont and Adam Roberts, and Adam's still the GM now. And the idea was that barbecue was in its infancy in Australia, but it was still becoming really popular, and there was no kind of governing body. Its primary role is similar to, a KCBS or something. It sanctions competition barbecue. But also, I think there's something like 25,000, it's probably way more than that, members on the Facebook group, because it sort of became this community. So one half of it was just straight up sanctioning competitions as they got more popular in Australia. And another part of it was just providing a resource on low and slow for Australians, because they didn't really know what it was. Or, I mean, I'm sure it's very similar. Classic Australian butchery is similar to British butchery. So when you would go to buy a brisket in an Australian butcher, you would get a rolled trimmed flat. And so everyone was starting to look for places for advice on why is this different. That's kind of how my story happened too. I came back from one of my visits to Texas and couldn't figure out why briskets were different. And then that led me down the world of figuring out butchery.
Yeah, it's definitely very similar from Australia to British barbecue, I think. And like the whole, there is the issue of going into a butcher's and, like you said, asking for a brisket or asking for these certain barbecue cuts, maybe ribs, and you get ribs that are just shiners, like they've got no meat on them, and you take them back, and they don't understand what the proper barbecue cuts are. So I think in terms of British barbecue being on the level with Australian, I think that's pretty bang on.
Yeah, and the other thing, you talk about shiners, people getting into barbecue don't even know what shiners are. And that's part of it too, that they just buy pork ribs from their butcher and then they wonder why it was so expensive and why it was so unsatisfying because there was barely any meat on there. So it's a two-part learning phase. The first part is learning what you want to ask for and why. I think a lot of people, both in Britain and Australia, start off just, does this look right to you? Is this what the butcher should have given me?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Jess, obviously your brand Hardcore Carnivore is internationally acclaimed. You've obviously got the range of rubs, you've got the book, you've got the YouTube channel. What was the inspiration behind Hardcore Carnivore?
The inspiration behind Hardcore Carnivore was as simple as I'd already had a pretty great audience from having put out recipes on my website, and I had a pretty good audience on social media. But there was no way for people to try my food, other than making the recipes. And people kept saying, you're going to have a restaurant, you're going to have a restaurant. And everyone I know who has a restaurant is like, don't get a restaurant. So I wanted to have a way where people and people I was engaged with could try things that I thought were the right flavor profile. So black was the first seasoning that I came out with. And that was, it couldn't be more of a basic story of like, hey, I really like the way this stuff tastes, and I think that you will too. It wasn't ever I never went into it thinking that, 5 years later I'm going to have like a seasoning empire that's available around the globe, which is pretty neat. But it was it was born of a love of great flavor and wanting to share that with other people.
Do you have a favorite?
Blackout sells everything else, and I think one of the reasons is that I feel like I think this is where the Australian benefit comes into play, because I feel like our palate is much more understated than the typical American palate. So when you taste black, it's very much about letting the meat shine. It's low sugar. It's not like an in-your-face, like, look at me, I'm seasoning kind of thing. And that's why it's resonated, I think, so well with people around the globe. And the black color is cool. So I probably black, first child, oldest child has to be the favorite.
Jess, you designed your own offset smoker in 2017. Can you tell us about it?
Absolutely. That was a super fun project. And it was made with Pits and Spits in Houston. They still make them. They custom hand make them to order. And it was basically the result of having cooked on a lot of smokers, figured out exactly what I wanted to happen. I didn't change too much of the actual cooking functionality. We did make the firebox bigger because a lot of people don't realize that, the smaller your offset smoker is, the harder it is to run. It's actually pretty simple or much easier to run one of those big 1,000-gallon smokers because you can light a big fire and go to town. So we made a few adjustments into how the smoker actually ran, but then a lot of it was just about practical additions for people who didn't have like a multi-$1,000 backyard kitchen, which was me, but needed certain things. So we extended the front so you could actually put a brisket down instead of having those ridiculous shallow shelves that you sort of have to hold it up with one knee while you're opening the smoker. And we put a roll on there, so when you're wrapping, because obviously wrapping in butcher's paper became really popular, we put something like that in. We put storage into it as well. So it was a combination of a few little functionalities, and just, I like to say it was just practical woman design, frankly.
It looks the business. It looks amazing.
Thank you.
You've also got a YouTube channel, haven't you, that you put out a lot of fantastic content. I've seen your Instagram TV and your YouTube channel. Have you got any kind of plans to develop that further? I mean, what are your plans for the channel?
Just keep putting out quality content. That if you build it, they will come. And I neglected video for a very long time, and I'm starting to give it the attention it deserves. And one of the things that's been really great for me personally, I love barbecue and I have a lot to do with it, but I am also a big fan of just meat and meat cookery in general. So part of it, you'll see, I usually release one recipe one week, and then the next week will be like a kind of meat science fact. So why do you tie meat? Why should you rest meat? How to pick a great ribeye? Because there's actually a lot that I've learned over the years that I'm really excited to share with people. And often people think that I'm a kind of one-trick barbecue pony. So it's been really, really great to show folks exactly, what we can talk about and what we can share. So that's what I've got more of planned. I've got more of that meat science, more answering those questions. I love doing that stuff. That's what drives me. That's what I learned along the way. I didn't even really cook steak before I started this whole thing because I was that person. I didn't really know how to choose the right cut at the grocery store. I didn't really know how to cook it. A couple of ex-boyfriends said 7 minutes each side, and we know that doesn't work. And so the whole thing just seemed like in the too hard basket. And then when you learn about how simple it can be with these basic practices of understanding fire and understanding temperature, so when I learned that and shared it with other people, I just love learning and sharing what I've learned. So that's my aim with the YouTube channel. It's not just about giving people another brisket recipe along with the 500 million that are already on the internet. It's about filling in other gaps to just give them great family meal experiences at home.
Jess, can you tell us the main differences between Texan barbecue styles and techniques and styles in different southern states?
Yeah, so traditionally, Texas was one of the only barbecue styles that had beef in it, and obviously it's because of the agrarian culture. So given that there were a lot of cattle in Texas, of course, you had beef barbecue, and there were a lot of German and Czech immigrants too. So it was sort of a meshing of the German heritage of smoking meats with the cattle that they had. And Kansas City is due north from Texas. And in fact, there was a cattle trail where they used to drive the cattle up north to be processed and then shipped to the East Coast. So that's why Kansas City is the only other city where you do find brisket on the menu, although they do it a little bit differently. And then, of course, in the East Coast, you've got the Carolinas that's so famous for their hog barbecue, either whole hog or vinegar or mustard style sauces, which, of course, pair really well with pork, being that it's so fatty and needs something to cut through the richness. But the funny part is, you know, these regional styles have all but disappeared. And it's one of those, you know, it remains to be seen if it's a good thing or not. People are opening barbecue joints all over the country and all over the world, and they're cherry picking the best elements from the different barbecues. So you'll find pulled pork and whole hog. Like, we're having people do whole hog in Texas, and that's not at all part of our heritage. There's my little staffy. Sorry, I have to point out the elephant in the room. So you're getting, you know, you can go to a hometown barbecue in Brooklyn with this t-shirt, and you can get Jamaican style jerk ribs and pastrami bacon, but the best beef rib inspired by Texas, and it's the best of everything. So, hey, stop it. Sorry. So those are the traditions, but really you can walk into barbecue joints all over the world, and that regionality is slowly disappearing.
What advice would you give to a younger Jess, maybe, or people with less experience looking to start on their barbecue journey? Advice that you wish you had at the start, what would you pass on to others?
The best advice that I think I can give is, and I'm lucky because I started a little bit before the major YouTube influx of content being available. And I think that you can psych yourself out. Like, having YouTube instructions is very handy for some situations, like, you know, how to fix a flat tire or how to, you know, those random things around the house. But when it comes to cooking, so much of it is just intuitive and it's just practice. It's just you getting to know your grill, getting to know your smoker, getting to know how fire works, getting to understand how 2 different briskets from 2 different butchers are going to give you a completely different result. And sometimes I think logging too many armchair hours in front of YouTube before you've actually stepped up and tried to cook can be a little bit counterproductive, because nothing is going to be better for you than just experience and getting those cooks under your belt. And even today, with the amount of meat that I've cooked in my lifetime, which is a lot, there are still things that surprise me. There are still things that go awry. It's a natural organic product. The main thing is there's no magic number, especially when it comes to barbecue. So I know a lot of people look for, well, is it 203? Is it 210? And it just doesn't exist. So take it all with a grain of salt and just log the hours at the barbecue instead of the computer.
Jess, post-lockdown, what are your plans for the future?
Oh, to travel absolutely everywhere. I was only home like 1 weekend a year before this happened. So, well, sorry, 1 weekend a month. 1 weekend a year is a bit extreme. But so this has been really unusual for me, and I've enjoyed it a lot. But I get so inspired by going out and eating other people's foods and the way they put ingredients together, and that's what I miss more than anything. So I'm hoping. It'd also be nice to be able to see my family, because right now Australia has shut its little island doors. So that's just one of those.
Hopefully soon. Any plans to come to the UK?
I would love to. I haven't been to the UK since I was 12 years old, and I know that the rub is becoming more and more popular there, and that the scene is gorgeous, and y'all have some amazing butchers and amazing beef that I would love to come and try. So nothing is on the books immediately, but I'm really hoping that something happens soon.
We hope so too. We hope so too.
Jess, thank you for being a fantastic guest on the Lockdown Barbecue Show.
You bet. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Jess. You've been amazing.
No worries. It was super fun. I appreciate all your work with the questions.